I have a question for you guys to get started. How many of you guys like hiking? Does anybody enjoy hiking? Okay, we got quite a few. I do too. If you don't, that's okay if you don't. Like some people, the outdoors isn't their thing. How many of you guys like, or maybe you haven't done this, but it sounds like fun, hiking in the snow? Okay, it's fun? Sounds fun? Okay. All right. Well, we are starting a brand new series. Hey guys, listen up. Del, thank you. So, we are starting a brand new series this week, and the title of this series actually comes from a hiking term, which is breaking trail. And it's something that you do when you encounter maybe a lot of snow that's on your path that you're trying to get through. And so this happens when somebody else goes ahead of the rest of their group and kind of makes a path for them so that it's easier for the other people who follow behind. Once you get going, once you have somebody who kind of sets out the path ahead of you, then it's easier to follow behind. And a phrase that we oftentimes call these people is a trailblazer. Now you might have heard this term, but maybe we think about it less literally and actually blazing a trail. But sometimes we might think of trailblazers who has forged a new or different path in some different ways. So one of the trailblazers that comes to mind when I think about these types of people is this guy on the screen. Does anybody know who that is? Who is it?
Owner of Apple.
Steve Jobs, yes. Steve Jobs, he is, So, this man I would consider a trailblazer because even if you don't use Apple products, you were probably influenced by him or impacted by him because he really came up with this idea that like technology, these kind of innovations aren't just for people who are super, super rich, but it's something that can be accessible to more people. Or how about this person, another trailblazer? Does anybody know who this person is? Ruby Bridges, that's right. So, she was the first African American student to attend a formerly all-white school in Louisiana. So after the Supreme Court desegregated schools, it was 6 years later. It took 6 years. And then Ruby finally went to school. She had guards that followed her and escorted her to school. There were protesters on the sideline. And even though this law was already made, the changes was already made, it took 6 years until somebody actually took action and blazed this new trail. Or how about this last person I got for you guys today? Who's this? Anybody know? Shout it out. I hear some people. Jackie Robinson. So, he was the first African American to play Major League Baseball. So, over in the next couple of weeks, we are going to be talking about some more trailblazers. But there's one person in particular that we're going to be talking about and the trails that they blaze more than anybody else. Can anybody guess who that might be? Insert the Sunday school answer here. Jesus, that's right, absolutely. So Jesus blazed trails through his birth, through his life, through his teachings, his death, and his resurrection. So we're going to dig into some of those things. Now, there are lots of different ways that Jesus broke ground. He made a way for us he forever changed the way that we saw God and others in a lot of different things. But one of the key ways that he did this, and that's what we're going to dig into tonight, is that Jesus gave us a new way to see failure, both our own and others. So I remember when I was in high school, I was a senior in high school, and I spent a lot of time here in this building working and volunteering, and instead of going to classes at my high school, I was taking classes at the college doing PSEO, and so I really didn't spend a lot of time at my high school. And I had a lot of good friends from high school as well, but because of the distance of not being at school, I didn't spend a lot of time investing into my friends. And actually, I wasn't a very good friend to them. So it was kind of this out of sight, out of mind thing. And as you can imagine, some of my friends reacted kind of poorly about that and, said some things behind my back or didn't want to be friends with me anymore, which, it makes sense because I wasn't being a good friend to them. Others just kind of understood where I was maybe at in the situations in life, and eventually, I realized that I wasn't being a very good friend to them, and I was able to come back into some of those friendships. But I really didn't do a very good job of treating them well. And maybe you guys have had a moment like that where maybe like me, you've hurt somebody that you really care about and you wish you could rewind and redo that. Or maybe you've trusted somebody else to keep a secret or a promise, but they let you down. And it's understandable if that trust is broken and you don't feel like you can trust them in the same way that you used to. Or maybe you've let yourself down. I know that I fall into that category where I'm frustrated with myself that I haven't measured up to whatever standards that I've placed on my own self. So today we're going to learn about two different people that were really close to Jesus and how they let Jesus down while they were his friends. But we're also going to look at the way that Jesus responded to his friends and how it was pretty trailblazing what he did. So now we're a few weeks, actually probably more than a few weeks. It feels like forever away, but Easter, believe it or not, is coming. And this series is actually going to lead us up to Easter. So Easter Sunday is this day that we celebrate Jesus' resurrection, and the days leading up to his death, though, were something that he was kind of in uncharted territory, something that he obviously had never faced, and we haven't faced either, obviously, but we might relate more than we think. So Jesus knew that he was about to die, but his friends and his followers didn't. Even though he had tried to kind of allude at what was going to come, they weren't quite getting it. But most of them didn't. But there was one who actually did know. And I'm going to read a little bit of his story. So this comes out of Luke 22, and I'm going to hop around to some different verses. So the festival of unleavened bread, which is called Passover, was approaching. The chief priests and the scribes were looking for a way to put him to death because they were afraid of the people. Then Satan entered Judas, called Iscariot, who was numbered among the 12. He went away and discussed with the chief priests and temple police how he could hand him over to them. They were glad and agreed to give him silver. So he accepted the offer and started looking for a good opportunity to betray him to them when the crowd was not present. And then I'm going to jump ahead to verse 47. While he was still speaking, suddenly a mob came, and one of the 12 named Judas was leading them. He came near Judas to kiss him, but Jesus said to him, "Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss?" And then jumping ahead again to 54. They seized him, led him away, and brought him into the high priest's house. Meanwhile, Peter was following at a distance. They lit a fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat down together. And Peter sat among them. When a servant saw him sitting in the light and looked closely at him, she said, "This man was with him too." But he denied it. "Woman, I don't know him." After a little while, someone else saw him and said, "You're one of them too." "Man, I am not," Peter said. About an hour later, another kept insisting, "This man was certainly with him, since he's also a Galilean." But Peter said, "Man, I don't know what you're talking about." Immediately, while he was still speaking, a rooster crowed. Then the Lord turned and looked at Peter. So Peter remembered the word of the Lord, how he had said to him, "Before the rooster crows today, you will deny me 3 times." And he went outside and wept bitterly. So I've had some not so great friends. I've been a not so great friend. And I've also had some really hurtful betrayals. But this story, as I'm reading it, is far beyond what I could even imagine. Judas, if I have to say, he was probably the worst friend of all time in the way that he betrayed Jesus. He singled him out and betrayed him literally to his face. He came up with a friendly kiss, and that is how the people knew who to arrest. Judas didn't just let Jesus down, but he actually wanted him dead. But it gets worse. Not only was Jesus betrayed by his friend Judas, then a little bit later, he was betrayed by his dear friend Peter, which Peter was probably one of the most devoted followers of Jesus and best friends of Jesus. But yet he still denied him 3 times. And when we think about Jesus, right, we remember that he is fully God, but he's also fully human. And so he experiences all of the emotions that we as humans feel. So can you imagine in that moment what it would have been like to be betrayed like Jesus was, to be let down by your friends in such significant ways? I want to take a poll here real quick, okay? I got 4 options for you. So I'm going to list them off and then I'll go back around and raise your hand. If you had a friend who did something horrible to you, didn't apologize for it, and you saw them the next day at school, what would you do? Here are your 4 choices, okay? Would you avoid them at all costs? Would you confront them and get the awkwardness out of the way? Would you pretend you didn't know what happened? Or would you move to another state, change your name, and pretend like you don't have to deal with it ever? Okay? So, how many of you guys would avoid them at all costs? Okay? How many of you guys would confront them and get the awkwardness out of the way? Okay. All right. How many of you guys would pretend like you didn't know what happened? A couple of you guys? Okay. Yeah. And how many of you guys would move to a new state, change your name, and move along so you can always avoid it? All right, okay. Well, now that you've imagined what it might be like to be let down, I want us to flip the script. And I want us to put ourselves in Peter and Judas's sandals for a second, okay? Can you imagine the weight of such a huge failure resting on your shoulders? If you're them, you realize a couple of things. You betrayed your friend, someone who had never been anything but kind and loving to you. And you betrayed your friend so badly that it got them in trouble to the point where they were put to death. It's easy for us to see in this kind of situation why Peter and Judas were so upset about the way that they betrayed their friend. Jesus, in the end, though, Judas and Peter chose to address their shame in 2 different ways. So in one of what I think is the greatest tragedies of the story of the Bible is that Judas didn't give Jesus a chance to forgive him. Jesus offers us all forgiveness. And he would have offered forgiveness to Judas as well, but instead Judas chose to end his life. He was so overcome with grief and guilt that he forgot what Jesus was all about. Jesus' life and mission were never about guilt or shame or judgment or grief, but instead Jesus was always about grace and love and forgiveness. And at the same time, Peter was also wrestling with these same feelings of grief and guilt. And even after Jesus rose from the dead, I'm sure Peter thought Jesus couldn't or wouldn't want to use me to lead in any way because of my failure. But instead, this is how Jesus responded. I'm going to jump to John 21. When they had eaten breakfast, Jesus asked Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," he said to them. "You know that I love you." "Feed my lambs," he told him. A second time he asked him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" "Yes, Lord," he said. "You know that I love you." "Shepherd my sheep," he told him. He asked him a third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was grieved that he asked him a third time, "Do you love me?" He said, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." "Feed my sheep," Jesus said. So Jesus didn't give up on Peter, even though he made this huge mistake of denying Jesus 3 times. Jesus still approached him with grace and forgiveness instead of anger and condemnation. Peter ended up doing exactly what Jesus told him to do. He became the shepherd for the sheep that Jesus was talking about, which was his church. And a lot of people still will credit Peter with being like the first leader of the church. So like Peter and Judas, maybe you felt like you've let Jesus down in some way. Or maybe you feel like you were never good enough for Jesus to begin with, for him to care about you to start. But if there's anything that we can learn from these two guys, from Peter and Judas, it's that there's nothing we could do to make Jesus love us any less. I want to say that again because that is so important, you guys. There's nothing we can do to make Jesus love us any less. Jesus shows us in these stories that even the most extreme betrayal, we're talking about friends who led him to his death, who denied him in his moments of need, will never change Jesus' perspective or his love that he has. Peter came to believe what Judas had forgotten, that while any other friends in the world might not forgive, Jesus breaks trails and Jesus always forgives. Jesus didn't give up on his friends, and even when they gave up on themselves. And the same is true for each and every one of you guys. No matter what we've done or what we will do or what we think about ourselves, Jesus never gives up on us. So we all obviously know how to give up on other people. I think that's something that so often we're shown in our culture. If things get hard or if somebody hurts you, to turn your back on them. But Jesus broke a new trail for us when he showed us that he'd never give up on us. So remember, the purpose of breaking a trail is to make it easier for those people who are following behind, and that's what Jesus does for us. He broke a new trail by forgiving us so that we can do the same for other people, that we can forgive others. And again, sometimes it means forgiving ourselves as well. We've all needed forgiveness for the ways that we've hurt others. Maybe it's making fun of somebody at school, or teasing them in a gym class, or spreading a rumor, or lying, or sharing a secret that wasn't yours to share. Whatever that may be, we've all needed forgiveness. So I want you guys to think about these couple of things. What do you need forgiveness for? Who do you need to forgive? Or what would it look like for you to forgive yourself or someone else just like God has forgiven you? So I'm going to give you guys just a minute or two, and I want you guys to spend some time talking with God, asking him these questions. If you don't know what you need to be forgiven for, if you don't know who you need to forgive, God will show those things to you if you ask. So I'm going to give you guys just a minute or so. Talk to God about that, and then I'll wrap up here. I'm going to close by reading a psalm, and I'm going to have Joel put it up on the screen too if you guys want to follow along. It says, "Blessed is the one whose transgressions are forgiven, whose sins are covered. Blessed is the one whose sin the Lord does not count against them, and in whose spirit is no deceit. When I kept silent, my bones wasted away through my groaning all day long. For day and night your hand was heavy on me. My strength was sapped as in the heat of summer. Then I acknowledged my sin to you and did not cover up my iniquity. I said, I will confess my transgressions to the Lord, and you forgave the guilt of my sin. Therefore, let all the faithful pray to you while you may be found. Surely the rising of the mighty waters will not reach them. You are my hiding place. You will protect me from trouble and surround me with songs of deliverance. I will instruct you and teach you in the way you should go. I will counsel you with my loving eye on you. Do not be like the horse or the mule, which have no understanding, but must be controlled by bit and bridle, or they will not come to you. Many are the woes of the wicked, but the Lord's unfailing love surrounds the one who trusts in him. Rejoice in the Lord and be glad, you righteous. Sing, all you who are upright in heart." So this is a song that David wrote, and he was expressing his repentance, and David knew that God would never give up on him. There were so many good pieces in that. We could spend a whole night just talking about that one song. But David knew that no matter what, no matter how big his mistakes were, God wasn't going to give up on him. And so if you guys are struggling to forgive yourself, remember that Jesus can and always will forgive you. And if you're struggling to forgive someone else, remember the trail that Jesus blazed for us, the example that he set for how to show grace to others. Jesus broke the trail and decided that nothing would ever keep us from being able to follow him. If there's something that's keeping you back from Jesus, I want you guys to think about that this week and to give that over to the Lord so that you can better hold on to the truth that no matter what, Jesus never gives up on you. No matter how big your mistakes may seem, Jesus never gives up on you. Let's pray. God, thank you for being a God of grace and love and forgiveness. Thank you for the example that Jesus sets for us, for the trail that he blazed on how to forgive others well, Lord. I pray that as we walk into this week, Lord, would you place those things on our hearts and minds that we may need to ask for forgiveness for, or that we may need to forgive somebody else of, Lord. Would you impress those things on our heart, and would you give us the courage to seek action in those things? Lord, thank you for never giving up on us, despite how hard life may be or the mistakes we make. Lord, thank you for never giving up on us. I pray this all in your name. Amen. All right, I love you guys. We will see you next week.